Hey everyone, it's Kevin Pantoja. Well, I mean, you should know that if you clicked on my video. And today we'll be looking at my analysis of Batman Year One from my local public library. So Batman Year One is one of the more famous graphic novels. I know I'd heard about it before I'd even, gotten interested into graphic novels. The creative team behind it is the writer, Frank Miller, the illustrator David, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, Mazzucchelli. And then you have Richmond Lewis as the colorist and Todd Klein as the letterer. Obviously, with all Batman comics, it was published by DC Comics. And it is 96 pages in length, although this version does feature a whole bunch of, behind the scenes like stuff at the end, which is pretty cool to look at if you're interested in it. All right, so I would call this a genuine graphic novel. It wasn't originally published as a, just as a graphic novel. It's basically 4 issues of, just a Batman comic from the original Batman series, I believe, in 1987, issues 404 to 407. That kind of retells the first year that Batman, that Bruce Wayne took over as Batman. So he's not exactly the as great at the job as he goes on to become. So it's interesting to see his struggles through there. Now for 96 pages, and I apologize for looking down, I'm trying to find the page that I'm going to discuss here. I'd say Act 2 begins somewhere around page 20, which is still in the first issue, issue 404 technically. And it would be right around here when we first get our first look at Batman. I say that that's the end of Act 1 into Act 2 because, the first act's all about introducing, Bruce Wayne, Detective, Jim Gordon. I don't know why I couldn't remember his name. And, even Selina Kyle is mentioned and shown early on. That's all like setup. And then once we get into him as Batman, we hit, the meat of the story, the action, which is mostly what Act 2 is. Act 2 goes on to, I would say, about page 87. This is when, right after Selina Kyle comes to the aid, not really the aid of Batman, unintentionally, I guess. She gets involved and is even considered by some his assistant, which she does not like. Right here, November 3rd, I'd say, this begins the final, conflict of the story, which involves Gordon's daughter and wife being basically kidnapped or abducted and held at gunpoint. And it's then that Bruce Wayne is involved too. He follows and he makes the heroic, as sorry if I put that in front of me, but as the baby is about to possibly fall off a bridge, Bruce Wayne leaps in and saves her. And Gordon realizes who he is, but is like, because I don't have glasses, I maybe can't tell who you are. So basically it was like the conclusion as their two stories merge together and they now have like a respect for each other of sorts, and it leads to them working together. Speaking of, it's basically a shared story between Batman and Gordon. It's crazy how they're both kind of the protagonists. They both have the goal of cleaning up Gotham, but they have to do it in different ways. Gordon's a cop, but he's surrounded by crooked cops, while Batman's a vigilante who takes everything into his own hands. Over time, even though Gordon knows that what Batman's doing is breaking the law, taking it into his own hands, he's a good guy, which is an interesting, like when you think about how the cops that Gordon works with are actually crooked and they're the bad guys. So it's a really interesting, dynamic. I think the conflict in Act 2 supports, maybe not the goal itself of cleaning up Gotham, but if the main story is about how Batman and Gordon kind of come together, it does. The main conflict in Act 2 involves Batman being basically in a building and blown up. The building's blown up and the crooked cops are basically in there to get him. Gordon's outside hoping that they don't get to Batman because he has realized, that Batman is an asset kind of. And it really hammers home the theme of Batman being good. Even as he leaves, there's a suit that he takes and he pays for it on his way out. He could have just stolen it, but he's a good guy versus the crooked cops who are ready to just, shoot to kill kind of. I'd say the story has a really, solid overall arc. The beginning sets up everything, like I said. It establishes why Bruce Wayne is doing this, Gordon's new, situation, how he's dealing with all of these other bad cops around him, and how he has to, we see that he's a tough guy when he beats up Flash is his name. Yeah, basically Gordon, beats him up because he had other cops beat Gordon up for being kind of a goody two shoes. The middle of the story starts putting Batman and Gordon together. They get several scenes where Gordon, like at one point, Batman rescues an elderly woman from getting hit by a truck, which is what Gordon's trying to do, and together they save her. And that's when Gordon starts to realize that Batman's not a menace. And like I said, a lot of it's basically on growing their relationship. There's a lot of action in that middle, as I said, with the explosion and stuff. The ending is satisfying because we see that, Batman gets to go out and help Gordon, and it brings their relationship together and establishes that partnership that becomes such a pivotal piece of overall Batman lore. But also, I think it doesn't specifically say it, but Bruce being able to save the baby without having to be in Batman costume, I think that kind of meant a lot to him. It shows that maybe he's the hero, not just the Batman character. So yeah, I just think that's good. And also, because it involves Gordon's daughter being saved, you get the sense that it's okay for him to not turn in this vigilante. For character arcs, like I said, both Batman and Gordon, they try to do things all alone early on. Batman barely gets help from anyone, barely even Alfred. Gordon is on his own on an island, basically, from all these other crooked cops. But by the end, they respect and trust each other, and that sets up their friendship. They learn to work together, I would say. As for, the McCloud transition thing, it does come into play in the comic, but I wouldn't say it's a ton. For the most part, it's action to action, because a comic like this does feature a lot of action. So for example, like on page 29, we have this scene where Gordon is fighting off, a criminal, and you can kind of see the guns pointed at him, and then we don't see exactly what happens in the middle, but we know that he's knocked the gun out and then he's taken the guy out. So it's just, it's not anything major. I don't think it has that huge of an effect on the story, at least from what I could tell. But again, I'd probably have to read it a second or third time just to pay attention to those transitions. I feel like that's the kind of thing that, probably comes into play a lot more than you notice unless you're looking for it. It's just one of those like natural things. There are a few pages, I think, that make good use of the page as a mini comic. For example, page 19 right here. I don't think this is one of the cases where it doesn't, because, we see it's basically Gordon versus Flash fighting. This doesn't work as its own comic, I think, because a lot of it's set up here. Granted, the 2 pages would work well, but not just the one. However, you just go over a page to page 21, and this is like Batman's, origin, where his parents die. And it's all told in one page. So this page itself works as its own mini comic. We get a beginning, a middle, and an end, which sets up, what's coming up next, especially on the next page as they continue some of his origin story. So when it does happen, it doesn't happen a ton, but when it does, it's very effective. I think they do a good use of the directional flow. I would say page 34 is a weird one for the dialogue, which I don't think, just like this one here, that it goes, sorry if it's hard to see, but you have him talking, and then there's this, and then there's this down here. It's hard to always tell what comes first. So I ran into that problem a lot. But as you could probably see from many pages that I posted, I don't want this video to run long, I'm sorry. The directional flow is always on point. It tells you where, you know where to look for the action. The dialogue a few times isn't perfect, but you know where to go from page to page. You see Batman attacking, and then he's throwing, like it all makes sense, from a visual perspective there. I'd recommend this to, classmates, because I think it's a great dual narrative. Gordon, even though it's called Batman Year One, Gordon is just as much of a protagonist as Batman. In fact, it felt like there was more Gordon than Batman. You don't see that, at least from what I can tell, in comics, especially when you're trying to establish, this hero so early on in his story. So it's an interesting storytelling style that I think worked for this, and I think other, my classmates and such, it's an interesting thing to look at and study for whatever stories, we want to tell going forward. As for Friends, I would also recommend it. It does a stellar job setting up. I have a lot of friends who already are fans of Batman, but maybe they don't read deep into it. And this really, I hadn't read this obviously coming in. It really sets up the crucial Batman Gordon relationship, and it dives into each character and what drives them more. We see that they're flawed, but they're good inherently, even when they do things that aren't. Like, I won't spoil it, but Gordon does something that's not exactly a good guy move throughout the story. Last up, just for some fun facts to end on a happier, a lighter note. In 2011, Batman Year One was adapted into an animated film, which got pretty rave reviews from what I could see. I'm gonna look into checking that out. And just another little fun fact: Frank Miller, in case you've heard that name, the writer, he's also been attached to things like 300, Sin City. His name has been everywhere in like comics and movies and stuff. So yeah, he's definitely a good person to check out. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.